whether or not, like, even if they are truly guilty, like, how just is it to keep them in limbo forever, saying like, well, we are maybe going to kill you.
On April 23rd, Taiwan's Constitutional Court held a crucial debate on whether the death penalty violates constitutional guarantees of human rights. This session is part of a larger review prompted by 37 death row inmates who are challenging the constitutionality of capital punishment, with the petitioners' legal representatives arguing on their behalf, emphasizing the need to address the root causes for violent crimes rather than perpetuating a cycle of violence, and that revenge is an arbitrary action driven by emotion rather than rational standards. While the prosecutors from the Justice Departments defending the death penalty, saying that the death penalty aligns with both retributive justice, prevention, and societal expectations. I took the chance to bring that debate back into our office and ask my colleagues what they think about death penalty. I'm Iris Xu, and you're listening to The Divide.
I'm from the United States, and I'm from Washington State, because in the U.S., it does vary from state to state whether or not the death penalty is enacted. And I had to look it up before I came here because as long as I have been alive, it's been like a point of controversy in our state. It's been like for the whole history of Washington State, it was basically only murder was the only thing you could get capital punishment for. And it was still very rare. And then also it was usually by like hanging. But like since the 70s, actually, there was a court order that put basically like a moratorium on it. And then from the 70s until it was abolished it was like effectively abolished in 2011. But from then, I think only 5 people total were executed. And like we even had Supreme Court judge, like, they quit their job in protest because they were so upset about it. So like it's been a really big, like as a state, the majority has been very against it for as long as I've been alive. So I was even shocked to find out that like the 5 people had been executed because I just remember that being a very hot button topic. And so now in the United States, we're one of the few states where it's impossible to get the death penalty. And it has been that way. It's been formally, like, it was unofficially abolished around 2011. There was a moratorium. And then it's been scrubbed from like all like constitution, legislation, and everything else officially since 2023.
I see. And do you support it?
No, I don't. I understand that there are like really serious crimes, and I think that there does need to be like punishment befitting of it, but I don't think that capital punishment is the right thing to do. And mostly because like the reason there was a debate is because I think that it is often used unfairly. So that's why we overturned it in our state, is because we realized there was a long history of racial bias and gender bias for who was assigned the death penalty versus who wasn't. And I think that that is probably going to be true no matter where you go. There's always going to be like a percentage where there is bias and there's more people of a certain type, whatever that might be, where your country is. Perhaps it's a profession or a gender or like an ethnic background. And I think that you can't eliminate those biases from a population. And when you have something like the death penalty, I think that's a really severe consequence to have when we always have a biased jury pool.
I see. And Amber, you're from the UK?
Mm-hmm. So in the UK, the last person was actually executed in 1964. I believe it was 2 people. But it wasn't actually abolished. The death penalty was not actually abolished until 1998, which is when we signed as a country the Human Rights Act so that we could fall in line with the European human rights laws. So as long as I've been alive, we haven't had the death penalty. Well, actually, we haven't had anyone since I've been alive who's actually been executed. That's the word. We haven't had anyone since I've been alive who's actually been executed. So I didn't really have to, I guess, think about this so much because it's never really been something that's been discussed in the UK because we've never had it. And I think generally people's opinions about it are probably that, you know, it's already abolished, so why would we think about bringing it back, right? So we just kind of think that. But I have found a couple of surveys saying that in 2023, doing a survey of around 2,000 people in the UK, that around 58% of people did agree that the death penalty should actually be a punishment for certain crimes. So I guess there's still kind of a mixed opinion about it. So it probably just depends on your personal opinion. But yeah, I don't think there's any reason why we would bring it back in the UK. And I personally feel that we don't need to. I think maybe there are certain crimes that if you were somebody who was personally affected by that crime, that you would feel that would be a reasonable punishment for somebody if it happened to your family. But I think in general, probably most people would disagree with it. Yeah.
See. And how about Phil? Talk about where you're from.
I'm from Slovakia, and just like Amber mentioned, it's been abandoned since 1960 something, because we had that. So this topic doesn't come up often, and I haven't thought about it, and I haven't put thought to it for a couple of years until you brought it up, and then we kind of had a quick discussion. So I'm not very well read on these facts, but it seems to be that there's like opinions, strong arguments for both sides. And
What's yours?
I'm still on the edge. I can't decide because you morally it's obviously not correct, right? Everybody should somehow have different like chance, and death is final, whereas life can go on and you can fix something can be done. But as Amber said, it's hard because we're here sitting, we have never been in direct connection with that. So for someone who had something happen to their relatives, close people, could see it differently, or just one death penalty it's hard to put it to every system so it works the same in every country, because different crimes in different country, or like different like the poverty level, or different rulers, and it's just tough. Do I have to give you the answer right now?
It's like a really like a lot of factors, those are not weighed equally across countries,
right?
Even across situations, right? So balancing those.
Because in the beginning when you mentioned it, I was kind of like, it makes sense to have it. Not that I would support it, but logically it would make sense. Like you just, there's people who don't want to be reinstated into society. They kind of like do bad stuff and will continue to do bad stuff no matter how much correction you provide to them. So I was kind of worried, like, okay, so what do you do with these people? But then you find some quick statistics while I Google, while other people speak. It's just then somebody said that it's actually more costly to do this than to imprison people. I don't know if that's any truth.
I have actually also heard that before when I watched certain documentaries or something about the death penalty, about the cost that it takes to do that. It doesn't make
sense to me, but
yeah.
And then they're like 1 in every 8 people is death penalized in the wrong way, like they were innocent.
Well, that's like when I was researching for this, like one of the very first people that we put to death in our state, we recently annulled it because we realized later that like it was unjust. And so it's like if it starts off on an unjust foot, how can you then continue it when it's like built on a shaky thing? Especially when it's like you may not have, even if you think you have all of the right resources to be able to find the correct evidence, that stuff changes all the time. So like,
as our conversation continues to evolve, we keep coming back to the issue of wrongful convictions. But supporting the right of those who were wrongfully convicted isn't the same as supporting the abolition of the death penalty. Or is it? Here's Ms. Lin Hsin-yi, who has spent 2 decades rescuing those wrongfully convicted and sentenced to death. She's now the executive director of the Taiwan Alliance to end the death penalty.
大家好，我叫林心怡，然后我是台湾废除死刑推动。
Hello everyone, my name is Lin Hsin-yi and I am the executive director of the Taiwan Alliance to end the death penalty. The alliance was actually established in 2003 and at that time we were called the Coalition for the Abolition of the Death Penalty. Our goal was to find alternatives to the death penalty. Initially, our efforts were driven by the need to rescue individuals who were wrongfully sentenced to death, including cases like Su Jianhe, which had not yet been overturned. Another example was the case of Xu Zujiang, also a wrongful death penalty case that had not been overturned at that time. So in 2003, our organization was formed with these issues in mind. The main founding organizations at that time were the Judicial Reform Foundation and the Taiwan Association for Human Rights.
The
most visible aspect is our advocacy towards the government, and we also organize some public education activities. But I think the most important thing we do is implementing some local research. At the same time, we also provide assistance to cases where the death penalty has been confirmed or to individuals who may potentially be sentenced to death. I believe this is very important work for us. Through our contact with those who have already been sentenced to death or those who may face such a sentence, we provide them with legal or daily life assistance.
With her work revolving around the death penalty, I asked her to help me unpack Taiwan's capital punishment and how it is usually carried out.
I believe we can truly understand that the death penalty is only when we've seen it firsthand. Otherwise, we might just see abolishing it as a concept. However, by truly witnessing and comprehending it, we understand what the system entails. Over the years, if you were to ask me simply what the death penalty is, I would consider it as a flawed and frequently erroneous system. It's inherently biased. Some are sentenced to death while others aren't. Why is that? Many argue it might be related to luck. How can a punishment be subject to luck? Also, many believe the death penalty serves as a deterrent, preventing people from committing crimes. However, there's no evidence to support this claim. Therefore, I believe it carries numerous inherent issues, and there are alternative punishments available. So I persist with such a law in Taiwan's legal system.
But what if these individuals were not wrongfully convicted, and they're actually guilty of the crimes that they have been charged?
I think at each stage there may be different reasons, but if I were to simplify, it might be summed up by what we've seen over the years. Of course, another aspect is that initially I had no idea what death row inmates were like. All I knew were wrongful convictions. So naturally we felt they deserved rescue. However, gradually, starting from around 2005 or 2006, I had the opportunity to meet with every death row inmate, and you'd realize they're not what you'd expect. Typically, the death row inmates we're familiar with are those caught in the act, sensationalized in media reports where you only see their crime, but you don't see their past or their future. From the perspective of the Alliance, I feel we've tried to understand why they commit crimes. Also, because they've been incarcerated for so long, we also see what they become after the crime. Seeing them, I find it hard to say, let's just kill them and we'll solve the problem. Understanding this through frontline work and interacting with death row inmates makes a difference, right? Like when we see these cases in the news, I also find it terrifying. Yes, terrifying. It's difficult to rationalize. How do you transition from rescuing wrongful convictions to feeling that the death penalty must be abolished? I think most people, would support preventing wrongful executions. They would agree that an innocent person shouldn't be sentenced to death or executed. But when it comes to the death penalty, it's not always a given. So those who support preventing wrongful convictions don't necessarily support abolishing the death penalty. But I feel like everyone overlooks one thing, that before a wrongful conviction is recognized as such, or before efforts to exonerate the individual begin, everyone believes the case to be rock solid without any issues. Everyone thinks, wow, looking at someone like Jiang Guoqing, for example, for a long time, everyone thought of him as this terrible rapist, but he was later exonerated.
Jiang Guoqing was a 20-year-old Air Force soldier who was executed 27 years ago in 1997 for a rape and murder of a 5-year-old girl. 14 years after the execution, a court found that there was no evidence of Mr. Jiang's presence at the scene of the crime and established that he was tortured into making a confession.
Or consider those death row inmates who were eventually exonerated. At that time, everyone thought they were bad people, but they were later cleared. As members of the Anti-Death Penalty Alliance, we oppose the death penalty and therefore scrutinize every case. Sometimes someone is accused of something they didn't do, which is a wrongful conviction in itself, but they should not be sentenced to death. If there are significant issues in the trial process, it's another form of injustice. This perspective may not be universally accepted, but we hold it because we know how prone the death penalty system is to errors and its inherent biases. By examining each individual case, we uncover these wrongful convictions. I must say it is those who support the abolition of the death penalty, people from organizations like the Alliance, the Judicial Reform Foundation, or the Taiwan Association for Human Rights who discover these cases because they recognize the flaws in the death penalty and therefore approach it with greater caution.
所以我刚才谈的司改会或台全会，这些人他们因为就是觉得死刑有问题，所以他会更谨慎，他才会去发现冤案。可是很多人 Once
someone has been sentenced to death, many people assume there's no problem, and they lose that sense of vigilance. Without that alertness, you won't discover wrongful convictions. So indeed, there's a gap between the death penalty, its abolition, and supporting wrongful conviction cases. However, I still believe wrongful convictions serve as a reminder for many of us. For example, in some states in the United States, they've discovered an alarming number of wrongful death penalty convictions, which, once wrongful executions occur, they're irreversible, which is why they're deemed so terrifying. So, is there a possibility for other equally severe punishments that can still penalize offenders but provide a chance for reversal in case of governmental or judicial errors? The death penalty is all or nothing. Once executed, there's no turning back. For me personally, this whole process began in 2000 when I witnessed a wrongful death penalty case. At that time, we had already decided to support him, and Taiwan's Control Yuan's Committee on Supervision intended to support him as well. However, he was executed. That was the first time I truly understand what the death penalty meant, not just in theory or from books, but because one day we were discussing visiting him in prison, meeting his family, understanding his case, and the next day we received the news from the lawyer that he had been executed the previous night. Hearing that news made me realize that I couldn't just talk about the issue of death penalty or merely oppose it. I had to do something. That moment drove me to take action. So, in 2003, when the Taiwan Alliance to End the Death Penalty was being established, I expressed my desire to join, and I've been working with them ever since.
从觉得说我当然会跟大家讨论死刑的议题，我当然不支持死刑的议题。可是真的是那一刻让我觉得说我一定要做一点事情，我不想要只是讨论它而已。我真的觉得我们应该要采取一些行动，所以才会是2003年的时候要成立那个替代死刑推动联盟的时候。我就说我想要加入，然后一直工作到现在。
The hasty execution compelled Ms. Lin to dedicate her career to the cause of abolishing the death penalty. But how long before the execution will the death row inmates and their families be informed of the killing?
台湾的死刑
They keep it secret, so before the execution, neither the lawyer nor the family is notified. The death row inmate only learns about the impending execution in the half hour or hour before it's carried out, when the prison guards come to take them from their cell. In earlier times before 2000, executions would typically occur within a week or two of the death penalty being confirmed, sometimes even sooner. So back then, once the death penalty was confirmed, the family would usually know that they might need to visit frequently during that period. They wouldn't know the exact day of the execution, but it wouldn't be long. However, starting in 2000, after Taiwan implemented a gradual abolition of the death penalty policy, the pace of executions slowed down. Therefore, you never know when it might happen.
The death row inmates only learns about the impending execution in the half hour or hour before it's carried out. Imagine knowing that you will be killed within 30 minutes or an hour, but not knowing whether it's going to be today or not for 21 years. That's the average prison time for all the death row inmates who filed the petition to the Constitutional Court this time. Thank you for listening to The Divide. My name is Iris Xu. Next week, we continue our conversation with Ms. Lin Hsin-yi, Executive Director of the Alliance to Abolish the Death Penalty, and a legal expert who was invited to the Constitutional Court to give his opinion on the capital punishment and its constitutionality. This episode of The Divide is produced by Radio Taiwan International. And a special thanks to Michelle Jiang for doing the voiceover for Lin Hsin-yi in this episode.